Do you fancy an easy boat painting, a boat scene within a harbour setting? So this is Livorno in Italy, the new Venice area of Livorno in the historic area, or Venezia Nuova, if my Italian pronunciation is correct. But a nice pretty scene with the city in the background. We have a row of moored up boats there, a timber jetty going along the side of the canal. This area, New Venice in Livorno, it's sort of reminiscent of Venice. I think there's a New Venice in Marina del Rey, Los Angeles as well, but this is Livorno. And fairly wide canals going around, not many canals, but going around the district, this area of Livorno. And then normally up both sides, you get all these different boats moored up, just people's personal boats, and all different sizes. But I thought this made quite a nice scene to contemplate for watercolor. We're sort of looking a little bit into the light, so it's contre-jour, and that gives us some nice contrast to play with. So, for example, we've got that light hitting the front of that boat there against the darker background. We have little bits of light as well on these boats. We've got some nice dark shadows here with a bit of a soft edge, so it's got like a harder edge there where it's emanating from the corner, and then it goes quite soft as it comes down towards us. Some timber decking that's just come away, and it creates some nice little marks going across the line of the decking. Staircase there, again with some light and darks in there to play with. Another object to frame the left-hand side. In the distance, we've got the main part. We're looking sort of into the main part of the city, and various buildings here, quite sort of squarish to deal with fairly flat tops to them. A lovely group of pine trees on the top of the citadel here. Then the walls of the citadel, a grassy bank in front of that, and then the canal. But quite a simple scene. I mean, there's no complex reflections to deal with. These boat shapes. Yeah, when you look closely at it, you've got lots of rigging and railings and these different boat types, but you just got to try and simplify it and just think about the main shapes, or try to think of all of those boats as one shape, and you're just sort of following the line of these boats going around the outline when we're doing our drawing, up there, over that boat there, around, and then up over these boats coming towards us. And then on the jetty side, we've got, again, just think of these shapes. This if we follow that line of the dark value, we're just sort of going around these boat shapes there. So all of this would be dark. All of this is light. What I'm also going to do is sneak in a figure here, maybe coming towards us, coming away from us, whatever, and that will create a nice little shadow there, another sort of area of interest, and have the figure light against a dark background, I think. So there you are, an easy boat scene, easy from a point of view of thinking of all the boats as one object. No complex reflections to deal with. We can't see the bottom of the boats. We can't see the complex curves of a boat too much. So that does actually keep it quite easy. And then the rest of it is fairly simple as well. Not too many details to contend with or complicated shapes. and just a little bit of perspective with that timber decking going away from us. Yep, a nice scene to handle in watercolor, a simple boat scene in a harbour setting. First step then is the initial drawing, where I'm going to be drawing the outline of the main objects. Paper I'm using is Saunders Waterford. This is cold press paper. It's a medium texture, not too rough, not too smooth. And it's 300 grams in weight, 140 pounds. So fairly light on their scale, not too heavy, and the paper's secured down all the sides. I haven't pre-wetted the paper. It's just paper straight out the from the sheets. And so starting with the horizon, the rooftops, that group of pine trees on the right sitting above the citadel walls, and across the middle, as I explained, just the outline of these boats, thinking of them as one shape. So I'm not really going in and individually drawing each boat, draw one boat, then go along to the next, draw that boat, then go on to that. Just following that line, assuming they're there, or just imagining they're one shape, going down that row, coming towards us. There might be a boat on the right-hand side where we just see half of it, but it'll be all right. I normally don't like cutting off boats, having half a boat on the side of a picture. Try and get them all in, but I think it'll be all right on the right-hand side. Here's this timber walkway. So up, I mentioned the steps on the left. That goes to the street level. And then below the street level, you've got this timber decking for, well, mainly for the boat owners to walk along, get access to their boats. There's a few little boat workshops along the way. And yeah, it just sort of navigates its way around this network of canals around this historic area of Livorno. Right, continuing on with the boats, getting in the bows, all the pointed ends are pointing the same way. And these boats, the actual tops of them, they're not too perfect, so we can be quite loose with the way I'm doing the drawing. Not very, I think if you make them boats too perfect looking, it doesn't make them realistic enough. There's lots of bits and pieces on top of the boats, going along the gunnels of the boat, the top rim, if you like, where you've got bits of rigging, railing, different objects. So you don't get that smooth edge. Right, let's get this figure just loosely drawn in. And not sure at this stage what colour that figure is going to be. Now, the staircase down the left, and then the actual steps, of course, we can see more. As the steps come down, we can see more of the tops of those steps, and then that side, that left-hand side shadow, just a bit of cross-hatching to give an indication of the figure's face, just strengthen up the legs a little bit more. Make sure I've got the background rooftops okay. That's pretty much it for the drawing stage, and then right on to painting. Getting over the first wash, where I'm covering up most of the paper here apart from the lights of the boats primarily, but starting with the sky. Now I've got a Raphael soft aqua brush here, and just really loosely going over the sky with a primary cerulean blue mixed. Now a little bit of yellow ochre on the left hand side. And I've gone over the rooftops. I need a brush that's got a very good edge to it, because I'm now going to be carefully painting around some of these boat objects. So I do want a fairly good line around the edge. That's why it's important to maintain that edge on the brush, not too much paint. Well, enough paint so that I don't have to keep going back and loading it up, but enough paint just to keep the momentum going. Right, this is the citadel wall now. With a nice warm colour. And then the actual water, which is a bit of viridian green, a bit of cobalt turquoise, staircase on the left hand side. At this stage the painting looks like a total mess, but it will hopefully gradually come together. Go a bit cooler and lighter down towards the bottom of the steps. Now the timber decking, I'll make my brush marks in line with the timber decking, just so that I can have a sense of the decking and the different shades of brown on the wooden decking. So I just made the brush marks. I just took the direction of the brush marks in the line of that decking, and go quite light up towards the corner, just where the light is coming around. So that's fairly light up there, hardly any paint at all. Right, back to the water. Bit of cerulean blue, cobalt turquoise. Tiny bit of viridian in there as well. Follow the outline of those boats. So after that initial wash stage, everything has been allowed to dry 100%. I've speeded up the video a little bit. Fast forward to this next stage, which is getting in the darks, going in with some darker values just to add the depth to the painting and get in a good range of values. So I'm starting with the background. Let me just describe, as I'm doing that, let me just describe my palette to you. So colours on the right, from the top, neutral tint, burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, viridian green, cobalt green, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, then a Windsor red, a light red, and two up from the bottom, cadmium orange, and then a lemon yellow. The brush I'm using now is a medium-sized mop brush. This is a squirrel mop from Jackson's, but it could be any sort of medium brush that again, it's got a good point to it, a good edge, good water retaining capability. And so with this background, now I don't want to be too dark, but a sort of, well, let's get some cools in there. The buildings were quite square and they could be difficult to pull off in this sort of loose style of painting. So I'm just really, like the boats, like the rowboats, I'm making them almost all one shape and just render them very loosely. Go a little bit darker as I come down to the base of the buildings. So there's that stretch in the middle of these background buildings going from the left hand, just sort of behind the left hand staircase steps, and then going up to the walls of the citadel. Paint around. I'm not sure what that sort of round shape is, just on the left hand side there. It's something on the boat, a windscreen or some sort of shield. So darker at the base of these buildings. And within the buildings themselves, I left a few little bits unpainted, which just, I think, adds a little bit of sparkle and freshness to the watercolour. Now I'll check my edge on the brush. Viridian green. And then a little bit of burnt sienna. So the viridian green is a cool green. That's going to hopefully not make it too bright a green. I don't want it to be so bright that it's coming forwards. But the pine, these pine trees, they're sort of a good colour to get is this viridian green and burnt umber, which I'm using. I think that's just about the right colour for those, with a little bit of darkness. So I'm getting this sort of umbrella shape of these pines, which are quite distinctive. They're all over the place in this part of Italy. Very attractive pine trees, like an umbrella or a parasol. Tiny bit of shadow underneath the tree and give a little bit of form to the top of the citadel over to the right hand edge. Now just below the top of the citadel there's a sort of horizontal line of shadow which is giving a nice bit of form to the wall. Not too perfect, get in a few angular shadows just to make it a bit more interesting. The actual side of the harbour now, the harbour wall on that far side, just any sort of dark value. there's the grass, there's a sort of grassy ledge just below the citadel wall, and it comes up to this harbour wall. And over to the right hand side, going over the masking tape. Just glaze a little bit over that harbour wall just to make it a little bit darker at the base. So I can glaze over that because the surface below is 100% dry, so there's going to be no nasty effects occurring. It's all going to be fairly well behaved. And then that base of the wall, I've lost the grassy green colour at the base of the wall, but it doesn't matter. It's in the back. It's sort of over to the background, so it's not ultra important. There's a little bit of green in there still, tiny bit. Steps. Now, this being on the left hand side, I'll do them fairly loosely, but I've got to be careful too with perspective and the height of where I am when I took the photo. As I come down the steps, the tops of the steps are going to see more of them. These gaps are going to be wider as I come down to the bottom. So I'm starting way over on the left, on top of the masking tape, dragging over. I don't need to worry too much about the right-hand side of these dark bands because I've got the right-hand edge of the wall here. So get down to the bottom. And they're fairly old steps, so nothing too precise with the edges. Actual wall now of the steps, coming down to the timber decking. Keep it fairly warm in colour. This paint is a lot thicker now in consistency, not too much water. And as I come down to the base, I'll then do the shadows on the decking with a cooler colour. Bit of ultramarine blue. No, that was cobalt blue there. So there's a bit of ultramarine blue, cobalt blue. And then I want a hard edge just where it's coming out from the wall. And then as I come down towards me, I'll be a little bit more erratic with my brush marks, but there's not so much water now on the brush. So as I bring it quickly across this rough surface, I'm going to get a bit of a softer edge to it. Next step now, starting at the far end, these boats, so connecting the boats with the edge of the wall, the wall the wall of the steps. Come out, go around that figure. Not sure at this stage what colour that figure's going to be, what the clothing's going to be. But again, just thinking of these boats, just thinking of their shapes. I'm constantly looking at the reference photo just to keep an eye on things there, and squinting my eyes, picking up on they're just basically geometric shapes. And with a bit of negative painting, we actually, then these boat forms appear. They will become, hopefully, a little bit more recognisable as a boat. Right hand edge of the windshield. Quite a few of these boats that they're in the middle there of the row. I'm just really doing a few horizontal lines, and they'll hopefully give the impression of some boats lurking in the gap. So I'm constantly making sure I've got that good flat edge on the brush. There's these horizontal marks. It's just a case of trying to judge. Well, it becomes very intuitive after a bit, after plenty of practice. You just sort of sense how much water's on the brush. And you then know when you touch the paper, is the paint going to suddenly whoosh out, or is there going to be some resistance, and you have to sort of eke it out and press a little bit hard on the brush. But you just, if you stick to the same brush, you get to know that brush and how it reacts and how much water it's holding. So now with a bit of negative painting, I'm creating the form of the last but one boat. And they're mostly like a sort of middle blue value, I suppose I've got now for these boats. So that curve creates the form of that second to last boat. Try and get a nice edge up to a hard edge up to the side of the decking. Now this last boat, I'll go a bit warmer on that last boat. Not have them all blue. So, bit of that Windsor red, there we go, bit of alizarin crimson, tiny bit of neutral tint from the top, and paint along the top edge of the boat, the gunnel of the boat. Now I'll get a little bit darker as I come down to the waterline. And then really, in this very bottom right corner, I need to keep it fairly loose because it's down there. It could be, maybe it's another, we can see part of another boat or some reflection. And then within the boat, with that way I'm painting now, that's creating the top edge of the boat. Now I don't want it too perfect. I need to break up that line in different places in a minute. There we are. Otherwise it just, you do see some people when they paint boats and they draw the boats perfectly well, far better than me, but then it's just so perfect an edge, and it just needs to be broken up a little bit with bits and pieces and rigging. And now back to the figure. Let's make this figure like a light blue. Bit of light hitting the top of the figure. And shadow. Shadows have to be done fairly quickly, and preferably all with just one layer, otherwise you lose the freshness of the shadow. So try and get the value just right, just a little bit darker than the shadow of the steps. That's then the main darks done. Now it's really down to using a smaller brush to get in some of the detail, get a little bit more detail into the painting with the timber decking, for example, and adding a few marks to the boats just to make them a little bit more boat-like. And there's bits of that, as I pointed out in the reference photo, there's bits of decking that are just coming up a little bit, rising up a little bit. Here's just a few lines, some broken lines, a bit of lost and found to create the planks, and a few marks for the buildings in the back. Now there's loads and loads, there's hundreds of windows on those buildings. I'm just going to put in a few of them just so that we can see that they're a building. But if I painted every single window, it just wouldn't, it would be too much detail and it would bring it too far forwards in my mind. So I'm going to keep it fairly brief. Few windows there, just a few marks. A little bit lower down. Some verticals just on top of the boats, and they serve a useful purpose in connecting different areas of the painting together. So I'm connecting the boats with the top of the boats with the background. So if it was a street scene, it would be lampposts or something like that, street signs. But here in a boat scene, we've got some masts and aerials. At this stage, there's not too much water when I'm mixing these colours together. So it's fairly thick. I'm just checking there the edge of the brush. I've got a flat edge and not too much water. So I get a dry brush mark for the line of that boat. And then repeat the process a few more times for the other boats coming down towards us. We can't see too much of that, and then this penultimate boat. A few little gaps where the boat next to it is just sort of hiding that line a little bit. Back to the medium-sized mop brush, I forgot to paint in that penultimate boat. Just painting a few details of the structure in the middle. Right to the back where there's the engine hooked up on the back of the boat. The staircase needs a handrail going down the side. Got to think of health and safety. Just makes it look a little bit more realistic as there's some steps. Deep in the shadows there, I'm going to just put in a few marks just to give a bit of form to the base of the steps and one or two of these timbers here in the shadows. Not too much. And then a nearly horizontal line going over to the edge. A few more marks on these boats. Now you need to be careful at this stage not to overdo things too much. Adding in too many marks, it just becomes then a bit too cluttered and overworked. I still want to try and keep things fairly fresh. I'm adding in there a bit of a darker part to the bottom of that boat, just where the water line might be. Typically these boats will have a darker band at the water's edge. Just try and get a little bit of that in. I'm deliberately not going to paint in all the vertical rails on that on the steps. I think if I did that, it would just be I would just overdo it. So rather like the railings of a balcony, just suggest a few of them. Now, making sure everything is dry now. Just getting out my hairdryer just to make sure everything's dry before I put on just a tiny bit of white paint towards the end. Working with a cotton-based watercolor paper, the paper can take sometimes a long time to dry, which is good because it gives you time to work on the painting and you're not rushing things too much. But then you need to make sure generally things are absolutely dry to get in a nice hard edge, and speeding up things with a hairdryer does work. Now the white paint I'm using is just white gouache, and it's fresh out the tube, fairly thick. I very rarely would add any water to it unless the tube was a little bit dried up. So it's fairly thick, and the key thing is not to overdo it too much. I'm just picking up a few highlights. Or these masks here, that would be really difficult to paint around those when I did that background wash. So it's a lot easier to have that smooth finish of the background, and then just with a little bit of white paint, picking up on those verticals, little masks, bit of rigging, some ropes, and they can look quite realistic with the dry brush marks. Maybe a few little marks in the distance. So here is the completed painting, New Venice in Livorno, Venezia Nuova, something like that. Apologies again to my Italian friends for my really bad pronunciation, but a very pretty area of Livorno, the coastal town of Livorno, or city, I think it really is. It's a very large town. And this very pretty New Venice area with these wide canals going around the historic area, and the timber decking that you have going around the edges, and rows of different boats and craft along there, which was the focus of this watercolor tutorial. A fairly simple, easy boat scene in a harbour setting, and just thinking of those boats, a row of boats, as a complete object. So rather than thinking of each of them as individual boats and drawing each one, my process was to think of them all as one. And you saw me in the drawing just going around the edges of the boats there, just very roughly. You can actually be as loose as you want to with the pencil, and sometimes little odd marks, you can just make them into something. These boats, there's all sorts of random shapes and edges to them, so you don't need to be often too precise. But within the boats, we do need to get a few strong lines, like when I was doing the shadows of the sides of the boats, and I was creating, well, for example here, when I painted this, I went over the top edge of the objects in this penultimate boat, and then I came around with the shadows on that second boat and created the edge again for the last boat. And then just blocking in basically all of that area there up to the side of the decking, and trying to keep a nice hard edge on that decking. I got darker as I went down towards the water's edge. You can see it a little bit more on this reddish boat here on the right hand side, getting a little bit dark, but keeping it loose in different areas of the painting. Don't be too detailed. The focal point is maybe that figure, and the decking is helping us lead the eye up the scene, and maybe we're wondering, oh, what's around that corner there? So it's sort of like an intriguing view, hopefully, for the viewer. But certainly that figure would be my focal point. And the background, yes, it's dark. It's a bit of contrast against the lighter bits of the boats there, but not too dark. Try not to make it too dark that it comes too far forwards, but just pushing it back enough and getting the right level of contrast with the sister wool. And I love these pine trees, these parasol, these umbrella pines, so evocative of this area of Italy. Perched there on the top, a nice sort of silhouette of that those group of pine trees on the top of the citadel. And then when I went to the detail stage, some little marks with a brush, smaller detail brush, getting in the verticals of these aerials here and masts, and maybe some darker lines in the boats, but conscious of this, as I was saying, conscious of not overdoing it, trying to keep that freshness. And then what can make a boat more realistic as a boat are these lines going across the top of the boat, just below the edge, the top edge. Just a few dark lines, and I did those with a dry brush mark, dry brush strokes. So hopefully that's been useful to you as a simple boat painting, and catch up with the next video.